Welcome back to the Postscript, a podcast about films whose discourses ended with an ellipsis rather than a period. I'm Chris Hall.
I'm Sebastian.
And I'm Mateo.
And on this podcast, we will be reassessing films of recent memory where the discourse was left unsettled. We will try to provide more definitive takes on films that generated a lot of buzz upon release, but the reputations have since become a bit murky. Movies that make you ask, where are they now? Last week, we discussed Alfonso Cuarón's space opus Gravity, which we ultimately deemed to be just a banger wrongfully lost to time and kind of taken for granted. This week, we will be talking about the once long-awaited sequel, The Incredibles 2.
So, are we going to talk about it?
Why?
The elephant in the room.
What elephant?
Mom's new job.
It's time to make some wrong things right. Help me bring supers back into the sunlight. We need to change people's perceptions about superheroes, and Elastigirl is our best play.
Better than me?
This was director Brad Bird's 2018 follow-up to the 2004 Pixar classic, The Incredibles. And in this film, we follow the Incredibles as they try to restore the public's trust in superheroes while balancing their family life, only to combat a new opponent who seeks to turn the populace against all supers. I would like to remind the viewer that the first half of this podcast is spoiler-free, as we broadly discuss the timeline of this film and our existing thoughts on it before rewatching the film and doing a deep dive. So, I want to start here. Similar to Gravity, this film, from the outside, was a massive success, right? 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 80 on Metacritic, which may not be Gravity's 96, but as someone who follows Metacritic really closely, if a film is in the 80s, it kind of becomes a must-see for me. Like, that is a very, very strong score still. Box office, it made $1.2 billion, making it the highest-grossing Pixar film of all time, which is, again, kind of speaks for itself in a lot of ways. This was a big, big movie. It did not win Best Animated Film, though, at the Oscars. That went to Spider-Verse. So why this movie, right? Again, was a success in so many ways. While that may be the case, even in the moment, the shadow of the first film did very much so loom over The Incredibles 2. Like I said at the end of the last podcast, I've never really had a conversation about this movie that wasn't just, it's not as good as the first, but, it's fine. Like, every single conversation always starts with, it's not the first, right? Like, if you're doing a Pixar ranking and you have The Incredibles 2 over The Incredibles, like, you're probably going to be banned from giving any type of take for a while. Like, you're going on a chat cooldown for a minute if you're ranking 2 above 1. Like, let's just get real here, right?
That's a 24-hour ban for sure.
Go just like sit the next few plays out, And so like the Incredibles is universally considered not only like one of Pixar's best, one of the best just superhero films like of this century. It is a bona fide classic, and between that and just the 14-year wait between movies, like, it was a near impossible task to meet expectations. Like, it kind of had a raw deal in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
A DJ Khaled suffering from success moment, if you will. And all of this,
and you had to beat out the Rise of the Underminer GameCube game.
Dude,
how are you going to beat that game out?
Oh, that is not fair. I was going to use that as my introduction for my experience with a movie.
Quick detour. If anyone who worked on that game is listening, you cooked. Like, that game was so
That's what I'm
hard.
saying.
Oh my goodness, that like
literally. It filled the hole
an itch.
for the movie sequel for a decade. Like,
totally. It filled the hole in our hearts for a while, and the day it became not canon upon release, it's bittersweet. This is all exactly why we want to talk about this film. It's like, now that we are removed from the moment and the capital E expectations that we had, like, how good or even how great was this film? So that's what we're going to try to figure out. I want to throw it to you guys, okay? What was your guys' experiences with this movie, okay? Where does it sit in your mind in 2023?
I remember my anticipation for this film. It was probably like top 3 anticipated movie of, I think it was 2018.
Yeah.
Incredibles 1 is my favorite Pixar film.
Mhm.
So the sequel was just already going to be like an unimaginable amount of hype for me. And similar to Force Awakens, to be honest, I feel like there was just a lot of pressure to kind of bring back that feeling of classic nostalgia while also reinventing the wheel. That, like, I mean,
Mhm.
when you ask for a legacy sequel of this magnitude, you're asking for a lot. And the thing was, Brad, for a while before we even knew the movie was happening, was kind of hyping the movie up himself, going like,
Mhm.
"Listen, I finally found the script that is worth making a
We
sequel for
unlocked
Incredibles
it.
2."
Yeah.
Yeah, that he found the key. So that got all of us like really intrigued. Like, what was the secret sauce? What's the Krabby Patty formula that made this movie happen? So that immediately was the intrigue. That created the hype and the mystique around it for me before the movie came out. Now, what I thought about it when it came out, that's another question. I'll let Mateo take it from here.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not gonna lie, I love the first Incredibles, and the first Incredibles is probably, I mean, it's between that and Ratatouille for like my favorite Pixar movie, like
Mm.
easily.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like a beautiful movie. Like probably one of the first like movies that I remember going to see in a theater was The Incredibles.
Mm.
Like,
Same. Mhm.
and like all throughout my childhood, it was like if you feel bad, like that's the movie you put on.
Yeah.
But I think the sequel, like I heard it get announced, but I was kind of, I don't know, I guess it kind of like flew past me, and I didn't end up seeing it until like 2 months after it came out.
Wow.
Okay.
And I remember going into the theater alone, and I was like not really in a great mood. And I just
Oh,
kind of
no.
like walked into this theater and I sat down, and it's like basically empty because it's like it was like a daytime showing 2 months into the movie's release.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Private
I
screening.
just remember
Yeah.
like sitting there, and that opening scene, I was like, I almost started crying. It was like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Like it just like instantly took me back.
Wow.
It was incredible. It was everything I wanted it to be for those first like 15 minutes. And I was kind of riding that high the rest of the movie. And I honestly, I don't think I even remember anything past those first 15 minutes just because of the wave of euphoria I was on. So I'm really
Wow.
excited to get back to it, to like actually remember the movie.
That's not
Yeah.
where I thought you were going with that. That's really
Me too.
that's really interesting. I was ready to give some
I
whole
thought it was
spiel
going to
of
take a
how-
dark turn, but
That is amazing to hear that. Like it had enough juice, at least in the beginning, to turn your day around like that. But again, but it seems like kind of with the rest of us, maybe our opinions on the movies as a whole is kind of buried beneath other layers of of expectation or just other variables.
yeah.
From what I remember from my experience watching the movie, I do remember thinking like, okay, like this is undeniably well made. This is a very, very good animated film. Like that shouldn't be taken away from it. We shouldn't, denigrate it too much. But I really, really could not shake that pit in my stomach of like 14 years. Like it took 14 years for us to get this. And like you were saying it, like Brad Bird, like he was on the record saying like we weren't going to make this movie unless the idea was right, unless it could be better than the original. That was the narrative the film was kind of being released under, which it was smelling a little bit like Cap, like in the moment, just a little bit. And like, we wanted to believe it was coming again from a place of like earnestness and the idea that like they truly had the story they wanted to tell. And Brad Bird was even talking about, it's like, is this was being released like at like the height of power of the MCU, and it's like, what are you doing to kind of counterbalance that? And he was like, he was like, I want to avoid the tropes of superhero movies. I've always been way more interested in the family dynamic of The Incredibles. And so like, it really seems like his head was in the right place for this movie. But again, like I know I just like couldn't shake it. Again, I'm like 2018 me was not much of a social media post, but even I think threw up a snap story of just like, I've like completed like 3 cycles of education waiting for this movie. Like I completed like elementary school, middle school, high school. Like a lot of life has passed waiting for this Janssen, and it was good, but again, it was the good, but, and not in an overly positive way, which is a little bit of a bummer. But I want to dive into Brad Bird for a sec, because he's in the center of all of this. All roads of this conversation kind of lead back to him. So first of all, he was the director of this film. He was the director of the first Incredibles, and he does not have many movies to his name. He has a really, really unique filmography. So his first movie ever was The Iron Giant in 1999, an animation classic. His second film, The Incredibles 2004, an animation classic, like one best
Yeah.
animated feature. His film after that, Ratatouille 2007, Mateo's other favorite Pixar film. Like this guy, like again, you can retire after that. Like that is enough. Those are
Seriously.
that is a padded resume already. 4 years later, he makes his live action debut with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And as good of a live action debut as you can get, because he just like kind of resuscitates the Mission Impossible franchise, gives it a soft reboot, proves he's not just a one-trick pony of animation. And then in 2015, this is a rabbit hole, but he makes Tomorrowland, which is on paper is the ultimate why wasn't this a heater film? Like it is just like, because up until this point, Brad Bird is batting 1,000 and is given just a blank check to make whatever he wants. Damon Lindelof, the showrunner of Lost, The Leftovers, like Watchmen, super awesome writer, had co-writing credits. It's got our boy George in it. George Clooney's like
George Clooney, yeah,
is in it. In another world, this is like the Chris Core movie, but it's definitely not this world. I'll say this much. I remember watching it on planes, being like, "What happened to you? Like never let bro cook again. Like this is maybe."
No, I saw the movie in theaters. That was like an opening night type of movie. For me,
Yeah.
and it was like,
yeah.
really this?
And maybe that's why you waited 2 months for Incredibles 2, just the Tomorrowland effect. Yeah, the opening night Tomorrowland.
Yeah.
And maybe, for all we know, maybe it's a misunderstood classic. Maybe I'll turn my Twitter account into like a Tomorrowland reclamation project. But that seems like a project for future Chris. So that
or never, Chris.
Yeah, or a never Chris. And then he follows that up with his last film to this date, The Incredibles 2 in 2018. Again, we all want to trust Brad Bird. We all want to give him the benefit of the doubt, right? We love where his head was at. And that's kind of where I'm going to this rewatch. You know, it's like I still have a lot of faith in him. Like it really does feel liberating, the idea of going into this rewatch of just being like, okay, like let's just view this as its own movie. And I'm just going to assume that Brad did give this everything he had. Like this wasn't a like Pixar like made him an offer he can't refuse. Like the check had just like eye rolling with dollar signs, amount of zeros. Like I'm gonna go into this believing that like this is the story he wanted to tell, and he just pulled out all the tricks in his bag for it, you know. And again, and one thing I'm looking forward to, and Seb, you touched on this a little bit, but like I mean, Brad Bird, he's clearly a master of animation. He knows how to construct an action sequence, and I know at the minimum, like I feel like a newfound freedom he had, I'm sure with animation, 14 years removed. I'm sure he did do some really exciting stuff there that I may not have appreciated in the moment, and may have found itself in the action sequences that may just totally stand out to me and may completely blow me away this time. So that's what I'm hoping for. But where are you guys at? What is your like best case scenario for this rewatch?
I mean, I remember particularly the animation being a massive discussion as well around the film. Like people would take stills like just from the movie and look at like the hair follicles on someone's shirt and be like, look at it. You know, like the amount of detail that they'd be putting into the animation. And I mean, it wildly enough, I do wonder, you know, in the universe where Spider-Verse comes out maybe a year later from Incredibles 2, that it's not up against that kind of comparison, because I feel like that in of itself did kind of hurt Incredibles 2 because it wasn't pioneering. It was just a big step in advancement in their technology that already existed.
Burnishing the brand a bit as opposed to, you know, taking a huge detour animation style wise. Yeah.
Exactly. So which is kind of a metaphor for what the movie maybe done itself, is that it, you know, took what the original did, tried some new ideas, but was kind of still working around the same framework of what made the original successful. Whereas like, I don't know why I'm now all of a sudden making this Spider-Verse comparison, but like Spider-Verse was like literally breaking ground in almost like every category. So
Spider-Verse does have a pretty traditional, you know, rise to hero arc, at least for Miles, but you know, it does follow a lot of those common beats. But it was a breath of fresh air in so many ways, especially in a world that was like so dominated by Pixar up until that point. It's like Pixar was sweeping every animated Oscar for that decade. So
I was just gonna say, maybe there was the fatigue of Pixar at the time. I'm wondering if that played into a bit of, you know, we were at the end of the Pixar reign, because, you know, we know for sure lately Pixar is batting, I don't even know what like below 200 for sure. So it's just one of those things that I do think fatigue is a factor in the why is it one of these movies of where is it now?
Yeah, now that you say it, yeah, Pixar has not. I don't think Pixar has really bounced back from the pandemic quite yet.
Yeah, Soul was their latest hit, I'd say.
Yeah.
Still.
Touching up on what Chris said a little bit too, at least for me, in the 5 years since that movie has come out, I think my like IQ for like action in movies is like a lot higher than it was 5 years ago.
No, absolutely.
I think like I've seen a lot more, and I think I like really have a lot more appreciation for like a well constructed action sequence, and like
absolutely.
And Brad Bird is such a creative like manipulator of space and like orienting it and making it exciting. And I really, really am excited to see that, to see him do something in this movie that I guess I wasn't really as big on in the moment. It's disappointing. I haven't seen Ghost Protocol, his Mission Impossible movie, but
wow, okay.
I want to see how he kind of like weaves through the mystery of it, because the narrative of that first Incredibles film, like the mystery surrounding Syndrome and like what he's doing on this island, and like why are they making him fight these robots, and you have that fantastic scene where he finds out the Chronos password from like gazer beams like etched in the cave, and he logs into the computer, and I'm just talking about the whole movie now, but like that whole sequence, like I want to see him recreate that, I guess, now obviously with Elastigirl with Alan Parr instead of so I'm excited for all of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said, and I really love what you said about having a new set of eyes, a newfound appreciation for just inventiveness and creativity in action sequences, because and to go on what Seb was saying as well is, not only was it kind of buckling underneath the pressure of being a sequel to The Incredibles, it was being compared to not only the first Incredibles, but to Spider-Verse. And again, it's important to remember that this was also coming out at the height of the MCU, at the height of a different type of superhero film. Like this was, the same summer as Infinity War, right? Maybe a couple months after. This is
and so Black Panther.
Yeah, and so it's the way we watch superhero movies was different back then, because we were again watching it through the lens of Marvel, and probably watching superhero action scenes through that lens as well. And so now that we couldn't be more removed from those eras and from those heights of power, I'm getting excited right now just thinking about just viewing this movie on its own terms, right? And that's it. Kind of the point of this podcast, So I'm really, really looking forward to that. So any last thoughts?
I'm still thinking about the GameCube game. I want to go just dig through my old PS2 games and just play it now. I am very excited for this rewatch, particularly because I remember the action being like stellar. That was like, I was like buzzing about the action when I came out. I remember coming out of the theater, and this is kind of weird, but I remember being like very much letterbox brain back then, being like 7 out of 10, but the action was immaculate.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's going to be a change there. I know that the third act was a bit rough for me on my first watch. I don't have a ton of memory of it right now, which is why I'm pretty excited to go in kind of fresh again.
I'm looking at Letterboxd now, and a 3.4 average rating for The Incredibles too, which is like that below a 7 out of 10. That is again compared to its accomplishments on paper is kind of stark. And again, it's just the power of just expectations and all these things that go into just assessing art. So I'm super pumped to jump back into it. And so Mateo, anything else on your mind?
I did kind of like scroll through, because I guess I was not really as plugged into like the film discourse 5 years ago, and I kind of like looked around, and I tried to like look at like negative reviews. There's not that many like from like the traditional press, like negative reviews for the film, but a lot of stuff on YouTube, like a lot of like kind of like very popular like watched video essayists and stuff, like really kind of like tearing the movie apart a little bit. And I don't remember seeing that when I saw the movie. Like I just wasn't connected to that. And so I would see that stuff like kind of later on as time went on. And so a lot of it seems to be kind of like focused around the narrative, especially the villain. I think there's a lot of hate for the villain story in this one.
That's
Goal
that's so
screensaver.
important you mentioned that too. The more we're talking, I'm just like, did this come out at the worst time possible? Because
Yes.
not because 2018, or that's also in a post Last Jedi world where like again like these like YouTube kind of almost pseudo critics who just make a living off of just tearing pieces of art apart. Like they were at the peak of their powers, and in a lot of ways too. It's people at this time back in movie culture. It really did feel like people were just feasting off and just living off of just tearing apart and just picking apart movies like this, especially movies with expectations as large as this one. Like this movie was in such an unwinnable scenario, and shoot, I'm starting to feel bad for this movie, man. Like. Like even if I'm like it's fine, even after rewatch it and I'm like this is just okay, like I'm gonna be such an apologist, but
give it the courtesy 8 out of 10.
Yeah. When people have so much Marvel brain, there's so much like ownership over the movie. It's like this is what the movie should have been, and just all these things. And gosh, that's just such a frustrating.
I like that word. I like ownership. Ownership is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, movie discourse very much around that time was about like knowing better than the creator, almost like people like
very much so.
Like the Reddit brain of like I could write a story better than this.
Yeah, and be like, oh, Violet wouldn't have done that. It's like, relax, bro. It's like, what do you know about Violet? It's like, that's what people would say. And it's just, assessing the movie on, the things it didn't do as opposed to the choices it did make. And it's just
what it does,
all these criticisms about things other than the film itself and the actual quality and filmmaking of it. So yeah, that feels like a good note to end it on. Looking forward to this rewatch, and so hopefully, you all have an open mind to revisit too, and you're not just like, oh, the Inmitables, I don't know, the mid-credibles too. I don't need to rewatch it. Hopefully, give it another chance like us, or you can just listen to our second half anyways. You don't necessarily have to rewatch it right away with us to listen to that if you've already seen it. Or if you're just like freak spoilers, I haven't seen the movie I'm diving in, that works too. So yeah, okay. Thank you guys for listening this far. We're going to take a quick break and we will be back. One Incredibles 2 rewatch later.
Yes.
Oh, and
yes, sir.
Mandatory Screenslaver awaits. Screenslaver awaits. That's the biggest expectation. I'm ready to tweet out like Screenslaver greater than signed Thanos or something like that. Like villains of 2010s ranked. That's enough
Screenslaver 1.
Yeah. Okay, see you guys on the other side.
The Screenslaver interrupts this program for an important announcement. Suit up, it might get weird.
I'll be there ASAP.
Where you going ASAP? You better be back ASAP.
And we are back. Us three have defeated Screenslaver. We have saved the city once again. Okay, Mateo, I'm gonna throw the ball to you. How about you just kick us off? Give us your general thoughts on your experience with the Incredibles 2, no subtitle.
So I told the story in the pre about going to the theater and that beautiful emotional experience I had, and I'm sitting down to watch this movie again, and I already know what's coming and I know what to expect. And the exact same nostalgia wave just like blasts me in the face. And it's like, it's just like instant again. Like you just can't control it. It's so beautiful. And I know like this is a major thing that people brought up at the time. The animation is so beautiful in this film. Like, and it's obviously 14 years later, a big step up from the original. And in that opening, it's playing so much with like contrast and color, like it almost like feels like concept art brought to life, kind of like prefiguring a little bit some trends we'd see now in animation with stuff like Spider-Verse, which came out the same year, but also like Puss in Boots now. Kind of we're getting a lot more stylization, and you feel little touches of that in Incredibles 2, and it's really nice. It's really nice.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of the opening, Mateo. There's the moment where the movie knows how big of a thing it is when it does the black title card, just Pixar Presents, and it cuts to like the interrogation room, very silent gray room, but it has like the lamp, and it's very dramatic. And there's something about starting off The Incredible with that kind of scene is it just grabs your attention immediately.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because like I was gonna say, like, I am just in general, I am such a sucker for when the opening credits, it's like when the opening title like cuts all the sound, when it's like audio, and she's like, "Some presents." Like that adds a half star to my rating every time I see it. Like that is the easiest trick in the book. And I want to take a really quick detour, because like it's so dramatic and serious, but like I do, one thing I do want to compliment the movie for is that I was thinking earlier, it's like this movie, and thinking about during the movie, it's like the movie, of course, is very, very easy to be enjoyed by children, but I love how this movie does not pander at all. Like this is not, the kids are not coming first in this film, you know, like this is very much so like an all audiences movie. And it's like, it is so refreshing when you see the film is equally created for the adults as with the children. Like it's very much so like a mature like adult. Like if you hear like screenslavers like monologue like out of context, it's just like that's like you know, it's like, yeah, that's not inherently from a children's film.
I mean, it's directly lifting from like French continental philosophy of the 20th century. Like I was like watching that, and like is the screensaver quoting like Jean Baudrillard right now? Like it's ridiculous, like the references that it's making. Crazy for that movie to go there. Crazy for that movie to go there.
And that's the thing, like I'm not gonna do that whole like, oh, it's not actually a kids movie. It's like we're not pulling that number, but it's cool that the movie doesn't feel restrained or with one hand behind its back, but because of its Pixar potential like animated children's, you know, limitations, like it feels like an adult made it, which is really cool. But circling back to what Mateo said about how just beautiful the animation is, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so colorful. It's the lighting is so gorgeous, especially in those like night street shots. Is so dynamic, and I just have to share this. I was talking with my roommate earlier about the movie, and he told me how he knows five different people. These people do not know each other. These are independent people from different aspects of like different areas of his life, that like all of their like wallpapers on their computer are the house from The Incredibles too. Like it's like, like the house The Incredibles live in. They just like, for some reason, that's just like such a visually appealing. And even like my other friend, that was like the biggest thing she remembered was just the house. And so I don't know why this house had such an impact on viewers, but like I mean the interior designer is cooked. I mean, where all the cultural impact critics are real silent right now, hearing that half a dozen folks have The Incredibles 2 house as their wallpaper. But I just thought that was funny and had to share that. But back to you, Seb, just generally speaking, like how was your experience with this film this time around? Or maybe what was your biggest takeaway?
I felt like I was going through the same motions of watching it for the first time. I feel like I went back into my 19-year-old self and was like experiencing the movie kind of very similarly. I was like mentally kind of going through the same beats of just like, I like this. I don't know if I like that. I'll be honest, it was a bit of a turbulent ride at times for me. The beginning started very strong though. And I was like, it delivered on the whole underminer thing. They didn't have to do that, but they did. And that was a lot of fun. And one of my favorite, maybe my favorite scene is literally just Bob and Helen like by the pool, and the lighting of that being absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And I'm just talking it out about like, do I go back and get a job? Is it my turn? Like them just having this insanely real conversation, which goes back to what you were saying, Chris, about like it's also for adults. Like
yes,
everyone relates to those kind of conversations where you bring yourself down to realism. But like the lighting of the pool, just the pool talks. It doesn't get better than that, you know?
No, absolutely. Like that, it was like during that pool scene, I made a note to myself. I'm like, again, when the animated film feels so much more human in breathing with real life than so many of its like superhero colleagues, I'm like, I mean, that alone that's like a microcosm of kind of the strength of this movie. Like even with the bumps, it's like the human drama is still so rich, and like in the family drama is so well done. It's like that will always keep the floor of this movie so high, because it's like, oh, I care about these people, like not just if they save the day. It's like, I care about their relationships.
Absolutely. I wanted to say something because you did bring up like kind of comparing it to other superhero films.
Mhm.
Something that I made a note of, obviously like all of these like big franchise movies now, there's a big emphasis, a lot of times to the detriment of the film on like fan service and like like bringing those deliverables to like your core audience.
Mm.
And this movie definitely has those moments, but I think because it's the characters that you love so much and that their like connections are like genuinely emotional and not just like, ooh, I know this character from a Wikipedia article. Like the fact that it's like a genuine like connection to the character makes it so much more special. Like in that, I hate going back to the scene, but I love it so much. The Underminer, like that whole chase, like when Frozone shows up, it's just the perfect character intro, and it's like everybody loves this guy. Like,
Yeah,
it's just like beautiful icing on the cake, and
literally,
it could be so much more annoying to have a moment like that in a movie, and it's just not. It's just beautiful.
That's really, really well said. I fully agree. It, like, the fan service can kind of be an overused term, and it's like at its worst, it's when it's just the DiCaprio pointing meme, just like, oh, I recognize that, and it's just like, all right, man. But at its best is when it's just, when it's beyond fan service. Like it's like when No Way Home came out. A lot of the reason for the praise of that movie is that like the Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire at all wasn't just them showing up. It wasn't just fan service. It's like, wait, like Andrew Garfield has like emotional heft and an arc in this. We're like, they like he's carrying some of the emotional drama in this movie. Like this is not just remember this guy. And again, that goes with this. It's like of course you have to have an Edna Mode scene in this, but it's not just her. It's not a rehash, it's not just her doing her Edna Mode bit again. It's still like it feels earned within the movie, and that was one of the things I would say I admire most about the film was that it is very much so in conversation with the first movie without trying to replicate it. And in fact, I think it's actively resisting trying to be the first movie in a lot of ways. It's like the first movie is all about, it's like, we need to lift the superhero restrictions. Like, it's like free our boys. But this one's, it's like, are there consequences for that? It's exploring the other, sides of the coin from the first film. And like in the same way, they very like overtly flip the roles of Mr. and Mrs. Incredible. Like it's just taking the themes of the first and flipping it on its head. And which is, it just seems so obvious that that's the move, but it's just so refreshing that it did that. But unfortunately, this movie did come out at a time where actively not providing the same sensation and feeling that your predecessor did, especially when the predecessor was 14 years ago, like you were most likely to get punished for doing that. Like, because again, 14 years removed, it's people are like, I'm ready for round 2 of The Incredibles, but this movie is very, very consciously trying to do something different while still in conversation with the first, which I do think it is an accomplishment in its own right. So what are you thinking right now?
I think the themes that the film is trying to tackle, and like the reversing of the gender roles, it's admirable. And I think like Brad has some really good moments and with the writing with that, especially the phone call scenes and like, Bob trying to kind of humble himself a little bit. And that's what I still enjoyed about the film is I'm like, what they're doing here, I really like. I just like, I couldn't find myself engaged all the time because it felt like the movie at times was just trying to hit a beat and then move on. Like it wasn't sitting enough. Whereas the first one, it felt like it let those moments sit a bit better. And when the film is at its best, Incredibles 2 is when it's in those atmospheric moments of pause where, like, for example, Elastigirl, when she's finally going on her missions and she's like just sitting on her motorcycle and just having a conversation about like, isn't this like silly that like I'm like waiting for crime to happen? Like small moments like that, and you get to kind of like see her just watching the city or get really excited about like a train heist happening. Those are great to me because it's not it's like non-plot related moments or when Incredibles when it's at its best. Like technically the first Incredibles between Bob and Helen when they're like talking about whether Dash should like try out for the team, like that's not technically plot related. But those are just great moments. They're great character moments. And that's what makes, I think, the moments in these movies so rich, and like you want to keep enjoying these characters. So that's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like the coloring in between the lines is definitely what separates this film from, again, from some of its kind of contemporaries and colleagues. Mateo, what are you thinking right now?
Yeah, I think I agree for the most part. And it kind of it has to come back to this as much as maybe we want to avoid it, but like just comparing it to the first movie, like I think what sets I think Incredibles 1 like a cut above, like to the point where obviously like I think it's like pretty unanimously considered to be like a top
Mhm.
3 superhero film of all time,
Mhm.
is I think just the script is so tight in that first movie. Like I think even the division between like kind of like the domestic and what Mr. Incredible is doing out there on that island
Mhm.
is it flows a lot more cleanly, I think,
I agree.
than in this movie. Like my one thing that I would say about Incredibles 2 is that sometimes I get the impression that it's a lot of like really like fun ideas that are kind of like forced to be together.
Mm.
Yeah.
You have like, for example, the absolutely hilarious scenes where Bob is like kind of struggling with Jack's like completely insane powers, and
Yeah.
they're completely hilarious, but like that almost feels like its own movie. And
Mhm.
then what
Mhm.
Elastigirl's doing is its own movie, and Violet's Date is its own movie, because I think the resolution of all those different streams doesn't really like it doesn't tie together, I think,
I completely
as
agree.
Yes.
I think the tying it together is so hard to pull off, and I think that's what Incredibles 1 does so well that
Yes.
Incredibles 2 struggles a little bit, even if those individual parts on their own are such a blast.
I think yes, I fully agree. I think the gel in between all the moving parts of this movie is holding on for dear life, and I do think at the end of the day it is. In many ways, I admire the juggling act because I never felt
Yeah.
I never felt too overwhelmed. I always felt like I was in good hands, and I was constantly engaged. But that was one of my biggest things leaving the movie. I was like, okay, it's like for better and for worse, there was a lot to love. But in the sense
Yeah.
that this movie is at capacity. Like this is which taking the positive spin on that. I think, and we talked about this a bit in the pregame. I think the movie beats like the paycheck allegations. I don't think this is a like I will take a movie with an overabundance of ideas and kind of filled to the brim, overflowing, than something that's half baked, or something that was uninspired. Because it's clear that Brad cares about every moving piece in this, and there's so much, again, like love and thought poured into all of it, even if he is juggling with too much. And again, I think the love in it does ultimately read. And I remember reading a review about this movie that said like it's unexpectedly a movie that might require a rewatch because it's so dense.
What did they know?
Yeah, what? even in action scenes, I'm like, there will be like an 8-second duel with Void, and I'm like, can we run that back? I'm like that like there was like he very effortlessly just did some of the most like intricate action like staging I've seen. I was like, what was that? Like it's just like it's almost like stimulus overload in a way of some of the things that's happening. It's like everything I'm watching, I'm liking, but again, it's the gel that's a bit of a concern, right? And this moves me into, and forgive me if I'm monologuing a little too long right now, but this kind of I feel like almost all my feelings kind of stem from this thing that I was able to put into words last night that I wasn't able to a few years ago. I was watching and I was like, I felt like the great Poe Dameron in Force Awakens when he's like, this thing really moves. Like he's like this movie, like I was like, for as filled to the brim as this movie is, I was like, it's pretty light on its feet. Like there's not really a dull moment. I was like, it doesn't feel too clumsy. But on the flip side, you could just as easily spin the pacing as kind of the film falling victim to the breakneck pacing that a lot of its contemporaries in 2018 and now have been guilty of. And even if this is the case, I think this movie does it a lot more meaningfully than a lot of Marvels do. Again, it's like we want to avoid comparing it to the first view as its own thing, but it is inevitable. The chapters of the first movie, and this probably maybe speaks to the script in a lot of ways, the chapters of the first film are so defined and ingrained in my mind. The beats are so distinct and the structure and flow of the story and all the character beats are just like so like cogent and easy to parse. And this film feels a lot more like a melting pot. And my ultimate thesis about this film that I came to, and believe me, this is I will land the plane right now, I promise you, is that, and this is where I think a lot of my uneasiness about this film comes from, even though I do love so much of it, is that while the film has countless great moments, it doesn't have many, this may sound silly, not great scenes. It feels like it doesn't have many scenes or like extended sequences. It's all these quick little bits. It's like, I admire this movie so much, and I don't want to apply this, but like I'm getting like TikTok syndrome from it. It's just this like these constant little. It's like the Roman Roy. He's like, give me the parcels, like give me the little bits. I'm enjoying all these like great little moments and all these great little interactions. But aside from like the like Elastigirl set pieces or like Jack versus the Raccoon, like you don't get to live in a space for very long, and that's why I think when you were like, it's the quieter moments when it's just like Mrs. Incredible on a bite, just kind of like talking about inner thoughts, like those shine through because it's like, can't we just like catch a breath and really like, like let these things kind of sink, and everything just kind of all starts to blend together. It's like the acts get a little blurry, and the thing that keeps me on the positive side of this movie is that it still feels intentional, and I think again, I think Brad Bird is still a master, and it feels like a really strong juggling act in a lot of ways, but it's so hard to like land these final punches and payoffs when you're struggling to slow down a little bit, and so that's just, I know I just kind of brain dumped right there, and so I'll throw it to you guys now. Okay, like how does that read for you guys?
That was very elegantly said, Chris. Like I think that's just
Thank you.
A great way of kind of summing up where this film probably fell flat for a lot of people. And to be honest, it helps put, what I've been saying about like not sitting into probably a lot better of a phrase or phrasing. I could definitely see that like Brad had so many ideas in the past like 14 years that he wanted to put into this movie. Mm-hmm. And so he was just like, I'm doing all of them. And so like that's the thing is like, there's moments where you have like, what's her face, the screenslaver girl,
Dever.
Evelyn Dever. Oh yeah.
Evelyn Dever.
Evelyn is like doing her monologue, which is ironically what the first movie made fun of. And she's like talking about how superheroes make people weak, like the normal people weak. And I'm like, that's interesting. I wish this movie would explore that outside of this one conversation that they get that they're doing. And like, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's the TikTok syndrome. Like they keep moving past, like they're like, okay, we hit that beat. Let's go to the next one. Let's get to the next beat. Like there's more to cover. There's more to capture. And I just, that's what I found frustrating about the script, because I'm like, there are good ideas here. I just wish you would even just flesh out even for 2 scenes, much less 3. But yeah,
yes, I completely agree. And I want to talk about the screenslaver a little bit more. And I know
talk to me
because I think the screenslaver concept was like maybe like one of the most like widely panned aspects of the movie that you see online. I think maybe the screenslaver, for worse, not for better, for worse, absolutely is kind of like one of the lasting legacies of Incredibles 2.
Yeah.
Sure. And like people kind of like ridicule like some of the mannerisms, I think, of like Catherine Keener's vocal performance have been kind of like heavily criticized. I don't really care about that stuff that much, but I do think that, to your point, Seb, and there's like the backstory about how she lost her parents and like the dependence on superheroes, but there's also like the secondary post-structuralist thing where she's talking about like the simulation, like how like everything is like a simulation now, and like we don't talk, we watch talk shows, like that whole speech. They're kind of like these two like diverging elements of the same character.
Yeah.
If you just focus on one and you cohere the plot of the movie into that one element,
right,
I think the movie's a lot more successful. And I hate to do it, but you go back to Syndrome in that first Incredibles movie, and the movie sets him up and also sets up like Mr. Incredible's obsession with doing everything by himself. And his kind of inability to accept help is what comes back to bite him when Syndrome becomes this like deranged villain. And
Yeah.
all of Syndrome's motivations come from that like one defining moment. And like it doesn't have to like hedge, I guess, with all these different ideas because it has that one idea that's so good.
Yes.
And you know, some movies can be a little more complicated. Some movies can, but like I feel like the movies that do that best are movies that are slower paced and not superhero action films.
Yeah.
Like I feel like when you're making a genre movie like that, you kind of got to pick your lane and you gotta send it down that lane and just do your best. And I think this movie spreads itself too thin. I think, you know,
It's been almost 30 minutes and we haven't even mentioned Bob Odenkirk. Like, dude, like talk about completely wasting such a talent.
Wasting what?
This is my opinion, but it's not a memorable performance or character by any means. Like I mean, I guess he's kind of a red herring because he could be screenslaver, but to me, the Evelyn thing was telegraphed from the very beginning. Like as soon as you introduce her, you're like, oh.
That's totally fair. And of course, I was joking earlier. It's like I love how the character design for Bob Odenkirk was just Bob Odenkirk. Like I love their like, and I think I will say, they are admittedly a little thinly written, but I do like at least what they represent thematically. You know, because they're kind of the two siblings are the polarities of the attitudes towards superheroes kind of in the culture. It's like you have the excessive fanboy. It's like they are the solution. And then you have like the opposite, and it's like they are the poison, when in reality, the truth kind of lies in the middle somewhere. And I want to touch on just a little more on Screenslaver. Is again easy to meme, but it's like to me, it's like as a villain, like I think a lot of aspects have aged well in a lot of ways, especially in this, if we're talking about it within the context of the superhero era, in just like a very surface level sense. I mean, I really appreciate it when the supervillain doesn't have a world domination plot. It's just like they have they have an ideal and they're like, this is just what I care about. It's like, to quote Syndrome, or to paraphrase Syndrome in a way, or to recontort, it's like when the world's always at stake, it's never at stake. And that's what's happening to Marvel right now. It's like there's always a world threatening crisis, but it's like it's you know, a lot of diminishing returns there. And then the moment we referenced it earlier, but like it's like the moment when you know, when Elastigirl, when Mrs. Incredible is like I don't know how you would describe her traversal. We'll see, when she's flying / traversing through like the city at night, and like the monologue is playing, and you're like, and, you know, Screenslaver's just, you know, kind of unleashing some tweets on us. It's like again, I'm watching. I'm like, this is cinema. Like this is like, even if Screenslaver's on the nose,
those are the best.
It's like the idea Screenslaver spitting. I'm like, give me more of that. And that's why you're saying it's like it's an excess of ideas, but it's like the reason I'm still way more positive on this movie than negative is like I like all the ingredients. I like all the ideas. Like there were no real missteps for me in this movie, other than just a quick detour, other than the whole, it's like, oh, our protagonists are now under the spell of someone. I don't really rock with that. It's like they have the mind controlling glass. It's like just a Chris thing. I just don't like that beat. I don't like that trope. You know, that just ain't for me. But like that, again, it doesn't last long, so I'm not getting too hung up on it. Otherwise, it's just like, and again, it's like the monologue about like the complacency, the detachment found within modern society, and like the way superheroes contribute to that. I'm like, this will probably only age like wine, even if it's a little on the nose. Like this is good stuff. And then that sequence when she, you know, she's traversing through the night city, that leads to you know, the encounter, the fight with Screenslaver, which is just an electrifying set piece.
Can I say something? About that like encounter real quick? I watched this movie with my dad, and he like, we're like sitting there on the couch, and he goes like, wow, that was really unnerving. Like he was like genuinely like on the edge of his seat, like kind of like tense and clutched up by that whole moment. Like,
no, I love that. I felt the same way. It's like when again, we're talking about this movie is so good about not pandering to kids. It's like the moment when she's on the talk show and the guy gets like mid conversation gets hypnotized. Like I was like again, I don't want to be the like SpongeBob and Patrick like on like the tiny hump on a roller coaster thing, but like it was like unexpectedly unsettling. Again, at least when you're going into a Pixar film, and then the shot in the following sequence with the fight with the screenslaver, when she's like trying to listen into the door and the camera pans up and you just see like, it's like the Hereditary like screenslaver shot of him just like waiting in the dark. So I'm like, Brad is cooking right now. He's just like, and I don't know why in my mind he had to like fight a battle to get that shot in the film. They're like, oh, he'll scare the kids. And he's just like, but the shot bangs. Like that's just my headcanon of what happened there. But a nice, like, haven't really seen this before. It's like the flashing room and this duel with screensaver that was so sick and kind of, you know, leads us into a conversation about just the action scenes in general. Is that, like we were saying in the pregame, we're like, Brad is you know, clearly a master of staging action scenes. And yeah, the staging and editing of all of these like set pieces and action sequences were just buttery and just so exciting and just so like, even just moments like Frozone just blasting some Jansons like in the house. I'm like, that is just dopamine's firing right now. Like this is, and then if the entire film was just 2 hours of like the camera like moving with a sprinting Mrs. Incredible, like a little maneuver that I haven't really seen in like in animation films. It's just like so visceral and so amazing. Like it's a 5 burger if it's just like 2 hours of that. Like I was eating that up.
The narrow Batman hallways in that one like abandoned apartment where that sequence takes place. It's just about like the setting and the atmosphere. Legitimately, I wanted the entire movie to just be like those missions of Mrs. Incredible.
Oh my gosh. No, literally. They were so gripping and so like the way this movie filmed like movement was so visceral and exhilarating. Between the motorcycle chase or just chasing someone down a hallway. Yeah, Mateo.
Okay, we had in this movie, and I hate to bring this to tie this in, but we had a vehicle on the ground chasing a train through a city that is very much designed to look like New York City, and I could not help but think of the French Connection. And like it's kind of got that vibe, that whole Elastabike chase sequence as she's following them on the ground and she's like trying to keep up with the train that's up there and she's like kind of going against traffic. I was like, I mean, he knows what movies to draw on to like kind of make this stuff work.
I love that.
I really have to applaud kind of Brad Bird's, you know, real film knowledge kind of dropping in there.
No, he sourced from the right places. And I mean, even during that chase scene, there's like the small moments where like Dash calls and was like asking about like the lost, like he lost something. Those bits are so good, mixed with like how visceral and fast the action is moving. That's when like the pacing of the movie, the fast pacing, is working in favor of the film. When those kind of mixing the family with the action.
The movie really sings during that, and it's just hurtling towards some conclusion. Yeah, well said.
I also I like how creative Brad is with powers in this movie.
Yes.
I think he really explores what I think is my favorite element of Mr. Incredible's skill set, which is not his strength, but rather the fact that he can endure so much physical punishment and be seemingly unharmed. Because they introduce a guy who is bigger and stronger than Mr. Incredible, but he can maybe take like a 10th the amount of punches that Mr. Incredible can. Like Mr. Incredible gets crushed by the Underminer's like giant drill. Like he's like under the treads of it and he comes out and he's still fine. He's still fighting. Like I love that. That is so fun.
That kills. I'm so glad you brought that up because when that happened, I was like, I guess he can just do that. I was like, I was not aware he was quite.
I guess he can go like underwater and breathe underwater a really long time, and like he's like getting like battered by like the currents of the ocean, and he's like turning this rudder. Like Mr. Incredible, like for lack of a better word, he's incredible.
Yeah, I know, and like you're saying, it's like, and that's why I'm like, maybe I just gotta like sift back through this movie with like a fine tooth comb because, in that final set piece specifically, it's like it's like maybe over a dozen supers involved in this set piece, but again, it never buckles underneath the weight of them because each of them.
I will disagree with that a little bit.
Well, I mean, in the sense that I would say, at least in terms of spatially, of like knowing where there are, and like Brad, like. He has like a creative flourish with all of them. And when like a little moment like Void getting Mrs. Incredible up until the plane, I'm like, this is amazing. It's a small little parcel, but it's like, this is again so creative and it's just like he's having so much fun in the action scenes, and even if it is overflowing, that is a note that other action films should take in terms of it's still all rooted in character, and you can tell he's asking himself, he's like, what can we do with this character right now? It's like what else can we do? And so
there is the one thing that I'll say about that sequence is that you have all of the supers who are like on the deck of the boat, and Bob Odenkirk just says, "All right, get your ambassadors to safety," and then they're just gone for the rest of the movie.
His exit in the movie is nothing short of astounding. That I thought Brad Bird let this happen, in my opinion. But when Evelyn's taking him on the plane, and she has the line of "This is for your own good," and he like opens the door, he's like, "No, this is," and he just jumps out.
That is a goofy moment, yeah, admittedly.
Like the conclusion of their arc together. So yeah, a bit flat, I'd say.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. So, so with all that being said, what is our final kind of assessment of this film?
I mean, I was a bit harsh in my Letterboxd review. I don't genuinely think the film is mid.
Thank you. I was gonna have some words if you called it actually mid.
Sometimes I exaggerate on Letterboxd for the fun of it, but I do think the film, like we talked about, like where the film falters. But I think the ideas that it presents, the action it has, and the moments where it actually does sit and with the emotion it's trying to portray, and the Jack stuff, well, most of it is pretty great. Like there's a lot to like in here, and I'd say more than not. But the thing is, Incredibles 1, you could argue is a perfect film. And that's just, you're going up against the Goliath in terms of just as a legacy sequel. And that's probably why it got lost to time. I mean, it was also in the middle of an incredibly successful summer of superhero blockbusters. It's just the timing of the release and just the kind of sequel that it was, following. Of the first movie. That's how I see that the film didn't maybe live up.
Yeah, I think I agree with Seb. I think for the most part, at the end of the day, like this is a general audience's movie, but it's also a movie that's like for kids. It's not, a movie that's for adults. And like on that metric, like I hate to like baby down and like give it extra credit, but as like a pure entertainment, it's very successful. And if you gave me the option to watch Incredibles 2 again, or watch like I'm picking out of a hat here, I don't want to insult any fans of any particular movie, but if it's between that and like even a movie that I enjoyed like Shang-Chi, I think I'd rather watch Incredibles 2 every single time. Like it's definitely, I'm very sympathetic to saying it doesn't live up to the original. I'm very sympathetic to understanding what the flaws are in the movie. But at the end of the day, you have to appreciate a movie that was made by, for lack of a better word, an auteur. Like, this was not a movie that was made by committee. It is a movie that was made because of a guy's vision, and maybe the execution is flawed in like certain segments, but I love filmmaking that feels personal and feels like it's the marks of a true artist. And I think for everything else, at least Incredibles 2 is that. Yeah, I don't think it's not a bad movie. Like, what are we? I don't know.
No, thank you. Mateo, you are taking the words out of my mouth. This is a movie with a legible author and with choices. Like there are clear choices in this film, even if there are missteps, clearly made from a singular human being. And I think, like you said, as entertainment, I think as an action film, it's exemplary in a lot of ways, in terms of how to structure a film around set pieces perhaps, and how to orchestrate a set piece. And I think, as far as action superhero fare goes, I think more notes could be taken from a film like this one. And I think if I had to sum it all up in a little phrase, like if gravity was taken for granted, I think this movie may be sneaky admirable and perhaps a bit misunderstood. Because again, of the people who like genuinely think like I saw some 1 stars on my feed. And again, you have people calling it anywhere from mid to bad, and it's like, chief, like that is I think you are like one like onward viewing away from really realizing what like a mid picture movie is. Not apologies to all any and all onward fans out there, and believe me, they exist. I've encountered them myself, but respectfully, I think it's absurd to call a movie like this bad. Like there's clearly so much intention and love and skill poured into this film, even if it's overflowing, even if it's messy. I think the level of competence is just so way too high, and the sheer amount of creativity is still undeniable. And like we said, at the end of the day, it's like the strength of the themes and the family dynamics, like get it to a level of baseline good that I think makes this a respectful film, and maybe more than it's got treated at the time, right? So any final thoughts on this film?
I still think the changing of the model for Tony at the beginning of the film is one of the most jarring things I've seen in my life. If y'all remember what he looked like in the first Incredibles movie, first what he looked like in the second.
I'm looking this up right now.
Wait, I gotta see this. Wait,
I'm looking this up right now.
Incredibles Tony.
It's not even close to the same person.
Whoa! Whoa!
I remember going into the second one being like, "That's not Tony. What are you doing? Like, what just happened?"
That's crazy.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Seriously, it's one of the most jarring things. I felt like I was being gaslit at the beginning of it.
I love this this triptych side by side. It says Tony Ridinger Evolution, and it's Incredibles 1, Incredibles 2, and then the Lego Tony Ridinger
the Lego
game.
minifigure.
It's like what? It's like, whoa, he really fell off. He kind of dimmed down. That's crazy.
That's hilarious.
That's funny. Okay, I mean, I feel like we rinsed this film well. Thank you to everyone for listening this far. We really appreciate it. Like we said, new episodes weekly. Thank you for being a faithful viewer. If you listened to the first two, if you've platinumed the Postscript podcast so far, we dearly appreciate it. And next week, a little tease, we will be watching 2015's Birdman. So stay tuned for that. Sneaky another superhero film. If you squint. That's a joke.
We're not one-trick ponies. We're not one-trick ponies.
Maybe a synthesis of our first 2 weeks, but no. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.